everyone. Welcome to the Recording Drums podcast with Blair Cinta. Today my guest is Matt Starr. Online he goes by the real Matt Starr. I'm going to apologize up front for the audio on this. My side was distorted, but it's not as pleasant as it should be. Information is there though. Matt has toured and recorded with Chris Shiflett, Dina Carter, Lucy Hale, Rita Wilson, Christopher Cross, to name a few. Excellent drummer here in LA. He's doing a lot of tracks out of his studio. He's got a lot of visuals for you if you're watching the YouTube version of this, but I think you'll get it through the audio podcast version also. He's going to tell us about his engineer influences and descriptions of his space and how he got into recording drums in the early 2000s. If you are a recording drummer, please check out my Introduction to Recording Drums course, available at my website, blaircinta.com. You can also receive a 10-point guide for remote recording, and this is super useful for drummers, songwriters, and producers, and you can have that free just by visiting my site. All right. We are already talking about snare shelves as this interview begins, how Matt built his snare shelves, and let's get into it. Here is the real Matt Starr.
I had my snare on like a wire shelf, snares on a wire shelf for a long time, and they were like side by side like this.
Right.
And that's just the worst.
Like, I never know how people deal with that.
When yeah, it's like terrible.
Yeah.
So when I finally got them, so I could sit them flat.
Right.
It's just so much easier when you're swapping them in. I mean, you know this because you have those amazing IKEA shelves that nobody makes, that they don't make anymore.
I know. Right? It's like the envy of all snare shelves, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But that's funny because my cymbal cabinet looks almost exactly like that. Looks like you have more slots than me, though.
Well, no, they're. Oh, maybe I do. And I ended up making it too big, which I guess is better than making it too small. But I also have heads in there. I decided to put like extra, like 24-inch heads and 22-inch.
That's a good idea.
The rest of my heads on the snare shelf, but yeah.
Nice.
So
nice. How's your studio, dude? So I was over there. Oh wow, that was pre-pandemic. When was that? Was that like a year ago?
I'm thinking it was about a year ago. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how long have you been in that room now?
This room actually is the longest I've been anywhere. It's like 2011 or something like that I moved.
Have you really? Oh, wow.
Yeah. I was in two other places before this as well, which were more like lockout buildings, which was a nightmare because as you know, it's like, you go to try to record and there's like literally a band in the room on the other wall, like blaring, and it's just like it didn't work. So I got lucky. I won't say like, because we've had like security issues here lately, but this room is in a building which is in a storage building for a company that does a lot of cartage and rentals and all that kind of stuff. So it's like one of 3 rooms, and everybody else that rents here who has production rooms, super cool, and you can always work out a time if you need it. And so this has been like by far the best situation. Plus I have like storage out in the warehouse for all my drums, so they don't actually have to all be in the room with me. I have like a snare shelf I'll show later, but like not having to have all the drums in here makes a big difference for me.
And when you moved in 2011, were you recording already, or was it more of a practice rehearsal space for you?
No, I can go back on history eventually if you want me to, but like I've had a rig of some kind since 2006.
Okay.
In different rooms, like, both the other ones were lockout rooms, and then this one is like its own special thing. But yeah, so I've had gear for a long time. I've been, trying to get better and better and better at this for a long time. But I bought my first round of gear in like 2006, which is kind of crazy when I think back on it.
And when did you come to LA?
I came to LA for all intents and purposes, I wasn't like really here until like 2002, because that's when I graduated school. I went to Llama for a minute. And which was a totally different place back then, which we could get into, but that's not really the on subject matter or anything. But,
We're talking about recording, man. We're not talking
yeah, we're
music
talking about recording,
schools.
but
Yeah.
no, let's not talk about it. But yeah, so 2002, and like I had recording gear before that, but I didn't have any when I was out here until like 2006.
Okay.
That's like
Right.
the time I started actually recording stuff. Yeah.
And and at that point you were like, I need to be able to record, or it was just something you wanted to get into?
No, that's actually a really good question. I felt like I started to see that people were buying stuff, and it was at that point when, I think the Digi-O2 stuff had been out, or Digi-O1, or all that stuff had been out for a while, but
Probably
right around that
Digi-O2 by
time,
then.
like,
Yeah.
yeah, like I feel like in '05 and '06 is when it started expanding to where you could get like an 8-channel interface, and with multiple pre's. There was like more of that
Right.
happening.
Right.
And so like so I didn't feel obliged. I just always loved, you know, being a part of recording, and I wanted to have something to start to get good at that.
Right.
And it became like way more affordable. Like once they made it so you could have a native setup and not an HD setup and all of that stuff, I that's when I started to pull the trigger on stuff.
Yeah, the native thing was a big deal because it was that in between LE and HD thing that was like affordable, but you could do
Exactly.
more. Yeah. Yeah.
And I had my first set of gear. Actually, if you want, I can share this right now. I had
Sure.
like these. Uh, 1 second here. No, that's not the right. So I had this thing here, which was an M Audio Project Mix.
Oh yeah, cool. Yeah.
And then I combined it with this guy, which was another 8 channels that you connected via ADAT. I'm pretty sure it was ADAT.
Really?
Yeah. So like at one point I had like 16 total channels or whatever.
Yep.
Of this stuff. But it was like not great gear. Like it was, the converters were not amazing. But for me at that time, like it was great for learning on and just kind of figuring out what I was doing. And
so were you actually running like 16 channels like early on in your recording?
Yeah, at some point when I had those two things,
Mhm.
I actually was.
Wow,
which
bold
is kind of
move.
crazy. Yeah. I don't think I was using all of them though.
That's what I mean,
I
though.
definitely didn't have that many mics. Yeah.
Okay, that's what I mean though. Yeah.
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 At the time I definitely didn't. But I learned so much just from like trying to make those crappy things. I mean, I shouldn't disparage them too much. They were pretty great for what they were at the time,
Dude, my Digi-O1, I did a lot on there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like that thing took me a long way,
How many channels were I feel like I should know this, but
that was 2 channels, and then I think that you could plug 2 more into it. So I think I had that plus a pair of APIs. I think.
Yeah.
That's my recollection. It's been so long.
So you had 4 channels going, so you could do drums, pretty cool drums with that, right?
Well, my early thing, I was definitely doing a 57 and a 58, just like I don't know what the hell I'm doing. But my early thing was I was actually recording songs. I was like playing guitar and singing.
Right. Yeah.
And the drum thing was like almost like, oh, now I need to put drums on. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like an afterthought or something.
Yeah. But that's amazing. You started with like a decent amount of microphones. It may not have been 16, but you were like, because I was afraid of that for a while. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I was gonna say I was lucky because this guy Rich Breen, engineer.
Nope.
He's sort of famous for having done like a bunch of the Yellow Jackets stuff. Like that's like his one of his main things. But I did some session where he was the engineer, and I got to know him, and he was super cool and helpful. And he actually ended up like recommending things for me to buy, recommending mics, recommending I don't know if he recommended the M audio stuff necessarily, but he definitely guided me through a lot of the early part of it. Like,
Right.
I would send him things and say, how does this sound? And he came over a couple times and helped me dial things in. And
Right.
so, yeah, I was intimidated by it for sure at first, but I just was like, diving in and getting help. And,
Right.
the thing that everybody has to do when they first start this thing is like, you really just have to make a bunch of mistakes and
Yeah.
sit there pulling your hair out, wondering how to do something and not knowing and calling somebody and
Yeah,
that
it's
whole.
it's really good to have a point person for what should I buy. And for me, that was
Totally.
Zach Ray. He would
Ah,
basically he would just send me eBay things. You should get this. Okay, cool. You should get this. Okay, cool. This is
yeah.
pretty dope. Get this. That's kind of pricey. Maybe. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, that's great. And was he also a guy you could call and say, "Hey, how do I do, I can't figure out how to do this in Pro Tools or whatever," or did you have somebody else for
That
that?
was more my a friend of mine, Kirk, named Kirk Wheeler, and he was like when I moved to LA in '96, the house I moved into, actually took John Button's place in that house,
Oh, cool.
and Kirk had an HD rig in '96,
Wow.
so I
Yeah.
was watching him edit and stuff back then in the house, he was a songwriter, and we would make records in the house, and I was playing in a band with John, actually, this band called Blackbird Sky that was like a kind of heavy Soundgarden-ish band, and we recorded in the house. So I was watching editing, Pro Tools editing early on. I was not touching anything as far as gear, but
Yeah.
I was watching it happen. So, but he was the
Observing.
guy when I started to get my thing. I'd be like, "Hey, dude, how do you do this? Hey, dude, how do you do this?"
Yeah.
It was mainly Pro Tools questions, but
Yeah. That's what Rich was my guy for that too. And actually, you know what? I know where I first met him, which would be interesting for you. I met him uh hanging out at a Kevin Littau session.
oh wow,
So he was engineering for her,
okay,
and I actually remember you made me think of it because I remember like sitting behind him and looking over his shoulder, and he was running Pro Tools, and that was like kind of one of the first times had seen Pro Tools really in action, and watching him edit things like it was crazy. This would have been like early 2000s or something like that,
and that was
and
at somebody's. Where was what was the studio?
yeah, it was like a like similar to yours, but bigger, like a backyard studio build of some
Okay,
kind,
okay,
in the valley somewhere. But I don't even remember because I didn't have a car yet. Somebody drove me there, or somebody drove
right.
me back,
And
whatever it was like that.
Mike Shapiro was playing drums, obviously.
Mike was playing
Yeah,
drums, and Mike Miller, and you playing guitar, and all those
right.
the crew,
Yeah, yeah. Wow,
Um,
cool.
yeah, and that's where I got to know Rich. And actually, another crucial thing with Rich early on was he convinced me to do all of these panels that are here,
Mm-hmm.
and he sent me designs because like these all look like they're the same thing, but they're actually a bunch of them are different,
Right,
right? Like
right,
these two guys here are big bass traps. They have like a big sheet of uh, lead loaded vinyl hanging from the top of them, so like they cut or they um, clean up a lot of like low end weirdness,
right.
and
Nice.
a bunch of these panels also have like that perf board stuff, like the things you hang tools from
Mm-hmm.
underneath the burlap. And so like he was the one that sent me all the designs. He's like, you should be putting a bunch of this stuff up because it's going to make a huge difference to the way your stuff sounds. And of course, that's totally what happened.
And you built all that stuff.
I built them. I like helped somebody else build them.
Right,
I hired somebody to
right.
help me build
So you got the materials and then you watched them build them.
basically, yeah. Like I was given permission to use a hammer and a couple of a staple gun.
Right.
That was it.
Yeah, you're the staple gun guy, right? It's
I'm the
good,
staple gun guy.
it looks good, man. So you did a good job, yeah.
Yeah, it looks okay.
And
Yeah.
that ceiling has a cement floor and brick walls, right?
Yeah, like luckily for me, one of the walls is brick. The rest of them are sheetrock walls.
Okay.
But I'm lucky also because it's not like perfectly square. There's a lot of like angles in here. I wish the ceiling was higher, but it's with the panels being up there, it makes a difference. Sort of like, at least I'm not getting really bad reflections from up there, even
Right.
though. And I just have to, and I'm sure you can relate to this, but I just have to be really careful, like how I play in here. Like,
Right.
I can't. I I've learned a lot about like what not to do in a smaller room from being in here, and I've
Right.
figured out how to dial everything for the stuff that I'm doing. Um, I don't even know that having higher ceilings would make all that big a difference in that respect, but I definitely feel like that's helped me to figure out a lot of things. So
Right.
yeah.
And when I was over there, we experimented with like opening the door and putting the mic in the hallway, just outside
Oh,
the door, and then
dude.
down the hallway. Yeah.
Yeah, let me share that. I'm going to show. Let me go back to sharing screen for a second because this might actually. Here.
There we go. Nice.
Yeah. Okay, so I saved. So this is like my room mic thing.
Mm-hmm.
So when it's inside the room, I face the two M160s. Sorry, I switched too fast there, but I put them up against the wall that faces the drums, and I face them against the wall in ORTF. And
Right.
I get a good result with that.
Mm-hmm.
And then based on what you were just mentioning, I now put them kind of either right at the door looking out into the hall, or I'll
Yep.
put them all the way out, or I'll put them down the hall or whatever.
Right.
Um, but man, like that outside thing is so great because you can kind of leave it alone, or you can like blow it up and destroy it, and all of a sudden it gets really crazy. I mean, it's like a really nice thing to have that as an option. I don't use it a lot, but when I use it, it's like it's pretty great. When it's needed, it's really necessary, and it sounds great. So
Right.
yeah.
So I'm just going to repeat a little bit of what you said because you kind of froze up there.
Oh,
So
I'm sorry.
no,
Yeah,
it's all right. So you were just saying like you put them out in different spots, either farther down the hallway or closer to the door, basically depending on the size that you need. Because
exactly.
if you could see down the hallway in Matt's room, it's a very long, cavernous hallway, and you can go full bottom very
Totally.
easily with that. Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say like I know you've done it. I have to try to do a when the levee breaks thing in here because I think like the, I think this would be like pretty close to like maybe what it would be like to be in a castle. Like it's
Yeah.
so cavernous and open, and it's a concrete, and who knows. I think it could sound pretty cool. I have to try that sometime
Yeah.
based on your inspiration.
I guarantee it'll sound rad. Yeah. Yeah. So how long? So
Yeah.
you were in there 2006, and then how long before you were actually like doing work for people? Were you doing stuff for fun, or did you actually have work? Like
Both. I did have some of the people I was playing with at the time who were not like necessarily game people or anything, but I was doing they it was getting that point in 2006 7 where people were starting to say like, hey, do you have a thing at home that you can do drums? And so I was lucky because I had people who were open to that and also like forgiving about anything that wasn't great on my end at first, because it was like I was still figuring stuff out,
mm-hmm.
and figuring out just even the process of doing it, like revisions and
Right.
that whole part of it. So I was lucky because I had enough chances to do it for real, but not like super high pressure kind of stuff that it like helped me to learn what to do. And so yeah, I mean, kind of almost right away, I just because I had the stuff, I think people were aware of that and were asking me to do it. So
Right. And then
um
how long do you think before you were like,
good at it.
either word got out, or you were like, oh, I'm getting pretty good at this. I need to like look for work or just let people know more.
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I think as soon as I started spending money on this stuff, I was like, I need to like justify spending money on this. I think was trying to get attention on that right away, or trying to like make people aware. At least in my circle at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And it also helped me because like I was producing a few things. Like really, I'm not a producer, but I was producing a few things for people at that time where like I started also recording other instruments in here, and um, learning how to record an acoustic guitar, and learning how to
Right.
record cello, and I even did horns in here one time, which was kind of
Mm.
crazy. Like just kind of
Cool.
you know, also getting some experience doing other things like that. Not that I would want to do that all the time because it's kind of intimidating to record section, but
I think
it's
that
fun.
stuff is super valuable because you start to understand, like, the frequency range of an acoustic guitar, and where, like, basically depending on the song or record you're working on, where that should fit in. Because
Yes,
if it's just like, if the acoustic guitar is the main thing, then you might have a lot of frequency, like low end and everything in it. But if it's really got to tuck in, you're gonna like high pass it and like tuck it in. And I think that stuff really helps inform frequency of mixing drums.
totally.
Yeah.
Well, I was gonna say this too. I don't know how you feel about it, but like I remember when I started doing other instruments, having already done drums, I was actually less intimidated because to me drums are like, not that other instruments don't have challenges in recording them, but like if you can record a drum set, you're in pretty good shape for like a base of knowledge about what to do with other things. And a lot of times with other instruments, maybe what a couple of mics at most on one source or something like that, as
Mm-hmm.
opposed to like, 10 or 12 or whatever. I found that part way less intimidating. The only part that was, a bit of a mystery is like, placement with all those different instruments. But
Mm-hmm.
the idea that you didn't have to monitor like 8 or 10 things while you're doing it is like so much, you know, easier to me.
Right, and look for phase between all of them. Like,
Exactly.
yeah, like
Yeah.
if you have two mics on a guitar cabinet, you're like, oh, cool.
Yeah.
This one's picking up
Easy.
like lower frequencies, and this one's picking up the more bite, and we blend them together and we set them evenly, so they're
Yeah.
get the yeah,
Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. I found that to be really, yeah, I just think drums are such a bear. And if you're comfortable with that, or if you can accomplish getting to the point where you're comfortable with that, then you're in good shape. And it's a lot of other stuff I think seems a lot easier after that.
yeah. I would say the biggest challenge is vocalists or
Yeah.
vocals, but that's like a whole study in itself.
Yeah, totally. Because there's so much to it, like even on an emotional level, like having to recording somebody who's singing is like a whole other
Oh
thing
yeah,
compared to
oh yeah, that's producing.
that's pretty right. Exactly.
Yeah,
Yes.
yes, containing personalities. Yeah,
Containing personalities. Yeah, exactly.
yeah.
Um, yeah.
So okay, so you started to like, you had that Motu, and then you started to like expand your mic collection and gear collection,
Yeah.
EQ, whatever, adding EQ, like all those things. Was there a particular engineer besides, was it Rich,
Yeah.
that you asked a lot about, like learning EQ and things like that, or was that
That's
more?
also a great question.
What was your or
No,
what
not
was
so
your kind of
much.
process about getting good at EQing and things like that?
That's a great question. To be honest with you, most of my knowledge came from sitting with somebody while they were actually dialing in things, or like, if you're at an actual session and somebody gets sounds on you, and then you come in and you look and you see what's going on the console or on the whatever. I did that, and I did ask, like I still I'm sure you do too. I still ask lots
Mm-hmm.
of questions about that kind of stuff.
Right.
But Rich was a big one as far as like if I was asking anybody at the time, it would have been him. And then um yeah, I'm trying to think if there was somebody else that actually taught me about EQ. I think I started like reading books when
Oh.
YouTube came along. I would go on YouTube and I mean this was like YouTube was started in what 2005 or something. So maybe a few years after that when stuff started showing up on there.
Right.
Um but yeah, it was like self-taught in a lot of ways with all of this stuff, like you are, I'm sure. Like I
Yeah.
didn't go to school, I didn't take a course. I just like sort of taught myself by asking questions and reading. And this is probably a good time to talk about this. Like I don't mention it a lot, but like another thing is like I've been an audiophile for since about 2012, 2013.
Mm-hmm.
And like that whole world is like literally about comparing masterings of different recordings, right? So like if it's like a famous record, like, I don't know, take Thriller or something, right? There's like, say, 10 versions of Thriller, digital versions, like, CD versions, HD versions, all that stuff. And audiophiles sit around and like compare those things, right?
Right.
And it forces you to like form an opinion about why you like something versus why you don't. And a lot of it has to do with EQ. Like, okay, this sounds harsh in the mid range, or this has too much top. It's like it's killing my ears, or there's not enough low end, or whatever. And you start to like learn about balance of frequencies and stuff like that on a obviously a more global level. But
Right.
my ear training from that uh made a huge difference for me in terms of like getting better as an engineer. Sitting around listening to vinyl, listening to, great HD versions of stuff, digital versions of stuff.
You were doing that with a
Actually,
group of people, or just on your own? Just like you're.
sometimes, yeah. Actually, Michael Ivison and I did a lot of that kind of stuff together. Because he's a total audiophile nerd as well.
Right.
So and then I have another friend who's kind of a part-time musician, but also like he's been an audiophile for like, I don't know, 30 years or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And he was the one that kind of like taught me. He's like, he would sit me down and say, "What are you hearing? Like, what do you hear? What do you like about this? What don't you like?" Um, so that was like really, really informative for me as well. So between all of those things, that's how I learned,
And other specific, let's see, are there like specific things that you? I mean, it's too much of a basic question. So I wouldn't want to say specific things that you listen for. But let's say you have two versions of a Michael Jackson record. And you're like, oh, this one has more high end. This one has more low end. Do you in your brain, do you go like, oh, I kind of know what frequencies those are, and I understand how to avoid those or get them, depending on like, hey, I'm gonna do an '80s thing and I want those frequencies.
Yeah, yeah. It started out where I didn't understand them technically, but I knew what I liked and didn't like, and then it evolved into me like figuring out, what am I hearing here? Like, what frequency is that's boosted that sounds bad, or
Mm-hmm.
whatever it was. And so, yeah, so it was an evolution that way, and it's just a thing of like it's like it's just ear training, right?
Right.
Like I think I took one acoustics course when I was at University of Toronto, like years and years and years ago. And it's like at the time it like went way over my head,
Right.
and it was just like utterly boring to me because it was like the guy was explaining frequencies, but there was no hands-on.
Right.
Like now, if you watch a YouTube video, preferably with somebody who really knows what they're doing, where they're talking about like EQing a snare, and they add some, I don't know, 10K or something, and you can hear, like viscerally hear, how that makes a difference one way or the other, whether you like it or not. That to me is like how that stuff should be taught, because otherwise it's just
Right.
like, oh God, like
Right.
I don't know what that sounds like.
That's like studying books versus
Yeah,
like learning textbook things versus learning with your
hands
ears.
on.
Yeah, hands
Yeah.
on. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, that's how I feel about that stuff. I think it's like you have to, or I guess I should say I wanted to understand deeper, so I went deeper. I think some audiophiles don't ever bother learning what the different frequencies are. They just say
Right.
more generally things like mid-range,
Right.
top, bottom, whatever. But
Right.
I wanted to understand it, so I dug in a little more, But yeah, like you said, um, if I'm trying to do something in here that's like era specific, and I know kind of like the kinds of things that went on EQ wise or whatever to get there, that actually does make a big difference because it helps me to dial stuff in better.
I would imagine it makes you much faster.
I think it does. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And also understanding like, digging in and trying to find like you and I have talked about a bunch of times, like
Right.
what did they do, microphone wise for this to get that kind of sound, and what kind of a console was it done on? Like, what kind of drums were they using? Everything makes a difference if you're trying to get a certain sound going.
Right.
So,
Right.
all of that was part of it for me. And it's funny because I was thinking about when you you when we talked about this before we did the interview, and like the history of me recording. Like when I was in high school, the first band I was ever in, we like rented a here. I'll go back to my share screen for a minute. So this was my like first experience recording anything was in high school, and we rented this Tascam thing, just cassette Porta Studio.
Yep.
And we had a couple of drums, and I don't remember exactly what the configuration was, but like I remember that it sounded really bad. And like, but even back then, that band I was in, we weren't writing original songs. We were just like covering rock songs that we liked, right?
Yeah.
And
right.
so back then it was like we were trying to get, like, I remember we tried to get the sound, or we tried to get Stone Temple Pilots Plush, because that was like out at the time, like mid-90s or whatever.
Right.
And so it started back then for me, like trying to understand like what is happening here. And I had no clue at the time, but I feel like, I'm saying this partly because I feel like one thing that if anybody's thinking about getting into recording, it's like you just have to dive in, because the more experience you have doing it, even if it's like making a bunch of mistakes, the better you're going to be at it. You have to go through a bunch of stuff to get decent at it.
Oh yeah.
So the earlier the better,
Right.
Just try not to be intimidated by it,
Yeah, right. It's like learning an instrument. You just got to start. And you got to be in it. You got to be in it because you like doing it, because it's so laborsome.
Yes.
That the only way I think to get better is to love doing it,
Yeah, you have to kind of be obsessed with it, right? Like that's how I feel about it anyway. Like,
yes,
I think about it constantly. I still think about it constantly. Like,
right.
I just want to be better at it. Every time I come in here, I try to get better at it.
Right. Right.
And I, now I used to, and I'm sure you could relate to this. I used to just set up like one kit with the mics, and nothing really changed except maybe the snare or, the cymbals or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But now not only do I change like the drums constantly, but I change the mic setups all the time.
Right.
Because it's like, I know I need to change it to get a certain sound,
Right.
and I'm less intimidated by that. In fact, it gets boring to me if I don't get to do that sometimes. Like I want to have the opportunity to like mess around with it.
I agree. Like at a certain point, I'm like, what else can I do with what I have here?
Yeah, exactly.
I have two questions for you. One, I think when I was there, which was just over a year ago, I think the drums were facing a different direction.
Yes. Yeah, I experimented. So they were in that corner,
right,
like facing out,
right.
And then when the pandemic hit, for some reason, I just like felt compelled to mess around.
Oh, so you're blaming it on the pandemic? I see. Okay.
Totally.
Yeah.
And now they're like, I don't know how much you can see. I can
we can see that
after, but they're right here, and they're facing that wall now. And for some reason, I felt like the low end sounded kind of cleaner and a little bit punchier when they're here. Plus, it made room mic placement a little easier because I can put it right up against a wall, straight ahead.
Okay.
And I don't have to worry about a bunch of weird stuff, or having it be on one side or something, since there are other things on this side of the room.
Right.
And it also made it easier for me to get over here where I am now, which is where the rig is. You know what? Let me show that. Why not?
That makes sense. Anything to make the travel to the control room easier.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so you're seeing this, right?
I'm seeing the Tascam.
Oh boy, here we go again.
It's like a weird lag in it, huh?
Okay. Yeah, it's a lag when I switch to screen sharing. I guess you can edit this out. I'll stop and start again with the share.
Yes.
See if this matters. Okay, now?
There we go. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So I'm sitting right here, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is where the drums are, facing outward beside me.
Cool.
And then let's see if I have a picture. I do have pictures down here that show. Well, I showed you the room mic pictures already, but basically, like the room mics are directly across from this
Right.
kit
Right.
where it's set up here.
Right.
Um, and these are just like I included a couple of these like alternate mic setup things just so.
Oh yeah, cool.
And I do this is something I was going to show because it's like again in a small room. Um, if I want to, I can go even deader, and so I have this like gobo thing
Oh,
here.
cool. Just so you know, the colors on your drums don't match
And
there. I've found out that's a really important. It's really important to have matching colored drums for recording. I'm just putting
I
it out.
know
It's free advice, okay?
it's messing with my OCD, believe me.
Yeah.
But I had to I had to do it.
I love that. You have a gobo that you can pull in really tight. That's rad.
Yeah, it's helped a lot with certain, as you can imagine, with certain kinds of sounds. Like it's made a huge difference. Because I don't have to do anything post. I still can if I want to, but I need to do less of it if I want to like really tighten the sound up. So anyway, I was just going to show you that because it gives a better perspective on the room.
I've also noticed in a couple of these pictures, you seem to always have a Glyn Johns setup happening with the colors.
Oh yeah, that's okay. That's actually more lately.
Okay.
For me in here, it's turned out that it's worked a little bit better. And I was at JJ Blair's studio before the pandemic, and he sets up with Glyn Johns all the time, and his room is pretty small. So here I'm just
cool.
to dial in like
you can just keep scrolling through. It's all good stuff.
Yeah, I was gonna try to find a good picture of the Glyn Johns thing. Well, there's the one that's close to the floor tom, but
right.
And when I was at JJ's, his room is really small as well. And it just worked really well in there when I listened back to stuff afterwards. So I started experimenting with it here, and lately it's just been something I've been really enjoying. So
does that mean that's something that you're blending in with other mics?
You mean the Glyn Johns thing is just like that's my overhead thing right now. That's what I've been doing.
And the floor tom mic?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. Hold on. So
what I'm saying is, are you using the Glyn Johns, the 3 mics?
Oh, I know what you're
plus adding like maybe room mics or stereo overheads or whatever.
So sorry. Yes, now I understand. Okay, so back to this first picture. There are mics on the top. Like this is like more of a standard setup for me. So like poles are in Glyn Johns. Then I have a rack and floor tom mics. I have 2 on the kick, 2 on the snare, and the room mics are across.
Right.
And then there's this little guy here, which I can. You know what? Let me go through these for a minute here.
Is that a 421 down there? What is that thing?
No, it's this weird. I'll go right to that. Where is that? Put these all in an order, so I wouldn't.
The thing that.
Okay, so it's this like $40 weird ass Radio Shack kind of mic, but it's a vintage one. It's like forget the name of the brand name. A-Static, I think is what it's called.
Oh wow, cool. Okay.
And this engineer named Chris Reynolds. Do you know Chris?
Nope.
He is buddies with Matt Chamberlain, and he works for the guy Eric Ross, this producer Eric Ross.
Yep.
And this is like their thing. Like there's always this weird mic kind of like pointing up at the snare from the floor. It's only like a foot off the floor or whatever. Right?
Okay. Yep.
And then you just like most of the time it's like distorting it or really smashing and compressing it or whatever.
Right. Right.
So I'll have that going a lot of times, just as an option for people. So,
yeah.
And then 451 on hats a lot of times if I'm doing a hat mic.
Right.
So lately I've been using, and these mics on toms, I've been using the Beyer MC930, the small diaphragm condensers.
Cool.
And I've been really getting cool sounds with. I'm really happy with the way those sound, and they also are good in case I want to do like a, hi-fi overhead kind of thing or whatever, with this like stereo small diaphragm condensers or whatever.
Right. What do you do since you have a single room?
Snare, like.
Okay, go ahead.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
No, it's all good. Is that
Uh,
M201?
Yeah. So just quickly, so Snare's M201 on top and 57 on the bottom.
Yep.
And then, D12, which is not what I use every time. And I'm always worried that it's going to die because they all die. But,
yeah.
But I love the way it sounds. So it's hard to use anything else. And then this is this, FET made by this company called Heiserman. Kind of like a new, Eric Heiserman's been making capsules for years, but he's starting to get into mics now. And this was Mario Caleri that hit me to this mic, and I love it. It's
cool.
Been really great.
That's good because a lot of people ask me like where.
So what were you gonna ask? I'm sorry.
First I was gonna say it's cool because a lot of people ask me about what FET do you use and can you recommend one that's not too expensive, and I don't know. I mean, what's the price point on the Heiserman?
Yeah, it's not cheap. It's like
Okay.
I feel like it was. I'm trying to remember the exact price, but it was like $1,500, I think.
Oh, that's not bad.
It's not terrible.
Yeah.
And it's worth it because it could be used for. They say it's a great vocal mic. I haven't tried it in that role yet. But I have actually used it as an overhead, and it was great, like a mono overhead.
Yeah,
it's killer.
I find FETs to be pretty cool, versatile mics. If you decide to put it somewhere else besides a bass drum, which is you just got to make the decision to wait. Oh wait, that doesn't have to stay there.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Yeah.
So
I was gonna say, what do you do? Because I had the one room thing at one time. What do you do when you have clients come over?
Yeah. So I have chairs that I keep in my storage area that I bring in here for them when there's other people in here. But yeah, they just kind of have to be here and put on some like heavy duty headphones, whatever, if they want to be here. And I've actually had a number of engineers in here too, or the kind of guys that are engineers / producers who will just sit at the desk and engineer. I don't know how those guys do that. That's got to be the toughest thing in the world to I mean, I've done it too. I've had people in here and engineered for them, and you're just like, I can't hear anything right now. I'm playing I have no, kind of have to use your eyes in that situation more than watch levels, and it's tough, man.
I think a lot of that, they're checking phase, they're checking levels, and then of course, obviously when you stop, they listen and they get a sense of what's happening. But they also, experienced engineers also understand that they're hearing the drums in the room and the drums sound good and they're being played well. So they know that 80%, 90% of their battle is being won already.
Right.
So as long as they can look at the levels, they hear it. They're hearing it in the room. They're like, okay, they can deal with whatever. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Yeah, and I mean, it's like what you said though. It is a challenge having everything in the same room. And I've actually found it lately. Like the more I, dial in my sounds the way I want them, the harder. The more crucial the monitoring thing gets for me inside this room, and even having the drums right behind me and my monitors are right in front of me right now, even that is tough. And I have them on stands, and I've taken a lot of care to dial them in here so that I'm not getting fooled by them. But man, it's especially coming from the audiophile world where I'm so used to the speakers being set up in a way where I'm hearing everything really clearly. In a room like this, it's challenging, and I'm blown away by some people just have their speakers on a shelf or something, and they just that's how they monitor themselves. I can't imagine how somebody could do that. More power to those people, but I want to know how my stuff sounds, and those kind of things can really throw you for a loop. Even checking phase in that kind of a situation could be really tough.
Yeah. I mean, I think phase is always a little bit of a mystery. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I agree. The room can fool you. But you also start to learn your room. You're you go out to the car, you listen to something, you're like, wait a minute.
Yeah, exactly.
I've
you hear all these engineers now saying that they're, it's a requirement now I've talked to like 2 or 3 people who say that they check everything in like those Sonos type speakers, that are basically mono. They're like this big, but they have 2 speakers left and right, but it's essentially mono. So they that's like a requirement now that they check their mixes and those things, because people are essentially listening to stuff in mono at this point.
You know? And people even listen through laptops.
Yeah.
But yeah, the single one-off Bluetooth speaker, you know.
Right.
I mean, there's no doubt that like sometimes when I hear something on Instagram or something, I'm just scrolling through, I'm like, oh, that sounds good. Like, that person knows what they're doing. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, there's I can tell there's low end in this thing. It's coming out in the right ways through, crappy little, yeah.
It's amazing. It's amazing what we've like gotten used to, or how we're consuming stuff now that way. Like, it's like very common to consume music on what you would consider to be like, not ideal. I mean, I'm speaking partly, I guess could come across as being snobby, but like from an audiophile perspective, that's just weird. But I also like AirPods, for example, which are not, those sound okay to me. It's a good way to listen to stuff. It's a fun way to listen to stuff anyway.
Yeah, but I think if you really like think about like, for me growing up in the 80s, like Walkman headphones were, I haven't heard of,
right?
Yeah, exactly. or even the like boom boxes, right? Like it was cool to have a cool looking boom box, but in the reality, if we could hear them now, how did they really sound? You know what I mean?
Yeah, probably
it's
pretty
like
bad.
Probably not great,
Yeah.
And I remember like my set of speakers that I had in my room that I traveled out to, I had in college, and I traveled out to LA with, they were like this big, and like the size mattered. Like it was like, oh, they're big, but like in reality, it's like they probably cost maybe $200.
Yeah.
So, you know what I mean?
No, exactly. It's always like there's always been an equivalent to Bluetooth speakers or
just think about car stereos. Especially in the 80s. You know what I mean?
So bad.
Yeah, exactly. It's like it was one speaker coming out of your dashboard. You know what I mean? But man, that didn't matter. You could crank that thing up and like, it was all good.
Totally.
Yeah.
I mean, I always think about that. Like my first music experiences in my life were like being so small that I was barely aware of anything, but being in like the car with one of my 2 parents while they were playing stuff through the car stereo and hearing like, I don't know, early mid 80s radio or whatever, pop radio and stuff like that. And that actually like seeped into my subconscious,
Right.
So yeah, I know exactly what you mean.
So what's one of the things that you've done in your room that you're like really proud of?
Well, okay. That's also a really good question. So like I actually there's something that I played in here on that won a Grammy, which is so I'm proud of that, especially from like that perspective. And that was this Lisa Loeb thing. It was she made a children's record, and it was literally just one song that I played on.
Right.
But I was proud of that just because like, I kind of co-engineered it with Rich Jacks, and he came over and we did that. And of course, like something like that, you don't even think about, it might be up for an award or something.
Right.
And then when it got nominated, I was like, oh wow, that's amazing. Something I recorded at my place is nominated for an award, and then it won, and I was like, this is amazing.
Right.
So I'm very proud of that. And then like lately, I recorded like a lot of stuff for my wife's last record that I'm really proud of. That and I'm saying that too because it's like one of the most current things I've done. And that was something where that same guy I mentioned earlier, Chris Reynolds, like he came here a lot and helped us, and he kind of co-produced it with us, and he engineered with me, and like he's a drummer as well, so like I learned a ton from those sessions as well, like doing stuff with him over here.
Right. And what's that record called, in case people want to check it out?
It is called Take It. It's on all the streaming the streaming services.
And they can look it up by Googling Mrs. Matt Starr or
yeah, Mrs. Matt Starr. Inbar, so it's INBAR Starr, STARR.
Okay,
my last name. So
there we go.
Inbar Starr, take it. And yeah, so those are like, I'm sure there's other things that I'm just forgetting to mention, but I'm pretty proud of those just because.
Yeah,
you know,
I think it's the things that come to mind first that are. That those are the important ones. That's doesn't have to be like, oh, I did all this production on this thing, blah blah blah. It's like, no, the one that like means the most to you, you know.
Exactly.
And obviously you're happy with your work on it.
Exactly. Yeah, and it's current too, which is like, important because it's like where I'm at now,
Mm-hmm.
So that's how I think of that.
So when you say current, tell me what that means to you right now.
In terms of like
in 2021, does it have like trap hats on it and 808s or what? Like, you know what I mean?
Oh yeah, okay, I see. Oh, well, what's interesting about it is there's a lot of like, I mean, there is straight up programming on it, but there's also a lot of like me trying to, because she loves electronic sounds, and I was determined to like blend electronic sound and also try to like recreate acoustically what it would sound like to have an 808 bass drum or a snare or something like that, and try to like make that out of something that I have here. And actually her record, because it's like a couple 3 years old now, but like I like progressed a lot working on that record with her, trying to like make that happen, so that's definitely a current thing for me. And then something that's always been important to me is like having every song have its own personality sonically. So like changing up kits, changing up everything to do with the sound of the song, so that it's not like one drum sound for the whole record. It's like every song has its own drum sound to it. So that's another thing, is when I say current, that's something I've been really into and really love to do. So
right, it's not necessarily like a band thing where it's like, okay, we have this basics, we have this sound, and it's a band, and that's
right.
That one sound is inherent to the sound of the band and or the record. Yeah.
Right, exactly. It was like every song we worked on, every song is its own thing, and it was done completely piecemeal. Like I don't think we did one live session with more than one musician, except we had a bass player, two different bass players in here to do basic tracking with drums a couple of times.
Right.
But like other than that, it was all done as overdubs. So, and we were at Jeff Babco's house, and we had Dave Levita here, and we just like we kind of did a bunch of really great people involved with it. So it turned out really well.
Right.
So,
those guys are hacks. I don't know why you hired those guys, but that's okay.
Yeah, I'll never call them again, ever. Actually, you know what's cool too is like I'm trying to think. There's Babco is definitely one of them, but like there are certain people, when you go to their place and you watch how they work in their environment and you see how dialed in they are, it becomes really inspiring to try to do the equivalent thing here. Like for me to try to do the equivalent thing here. And when I saw Babco and like the way he works, and he gets into this really creative space, and yet he's really quick. Like he gets everything done fast, but he's just like, everything's dialed, everything's ready to go. It's just like, if you want him to try something different, he's like on it like that, doing something else, dialing in a sound. And that was really cool to see too, for me, like just to, oh wow, this is like the modern recording era. Like this is what we're in now. It's like, this is how you do it.
Yeah. I mean, Jeff is incredibly fast. I just played with him last week, and it was at an outside studio. And
amazing.
Yes, it was. It was the first time I played with, tracked with people in a year,
Amazing.
But yet, Jeff he's incredibly fast, whether it's a synth sound or just going to a B3, and then not only dialing a tone, but playing stylistically correct, and then playing it right the first time. Jeff is phenomenal. Yeah.
He's amazing.
Yeah. I would agree though. That's what I strive to do. It's like when people are here, I think, we work alone so much that we definitely get into our rhythms working alone. I think we get faster. But then when you notice that people come over and they're like, hey, well, what if it could be maybe like this? You're like, yes, I know what to do.
Yeah.
Like, bam, right. Whether it's a percussion thing or tweaking something, like, hey, give me 2 minutes. Let me sit down at the computer. Give me 2 minutes to dial this thing in,
Yeah.
Whatever it is. I mean, I think.
Do you ever, I'm curious with you, do you ever, because I have a struggle with that sometimes where it's like, there are certain cases where I'm in here by myself and I get into something and I go in a certain direction and it takes me a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And under pressure, I could do it faster, but the end result of working sometimes for hours on something can actually be super cool as well. So it's like, do you ever find yourself in like being pulled in both directions like that, where you wish you could spend longer on something because you could get it to a different place that would, but it would require a lot of work, is what I'm saying,
Yes. The answer is yes. The short answer is yes. I think there's two sides to that answer. One is when someone is not here and they basically kind of tell you what they want and you go, okay, cool. And then you dive in like real hard. And you've finished after 2 hours, 2.5 hours, and you're like, this is my masterpiece. And you email it off to them and they go, wow, great sounds. This is cool. Can we talk? And you go, oh, you're like, and you know that something needs to change. So literally let's see, today is Tuesday. So on Friday, I had this kind of happen. And then yesterday I had this kind of happen on 2 different projects. And the first one was, it was for what I thought was a solo artist, friend of mine,
right.
But it turns out it was for his band.
Oh.
I didn't know that, so I went in a certain direction. And then we talked, and then he said, no, this is for the band. And I went, oh, okay. I will approach this totally differently now. Not totally differently, but there was definitely an attitude shift and a style shift. The sounds basically stayed the same, but there was that. And then the thing I was working on yesterday, it was one of those things where I could keep going and going and going, and it would all probably be cool.
Yeah.
And it's like you start creating the drum symphony, but it's still this thing, since we're remote, you're like, like, how far do I go? What else do I need to do here? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then the time versus money thing. And at a certain point, you're like, okay, I could literally spend, like, I've spent, X amount of hours on this, and I could spend 2 or 3 more, but I'm going to cut it off because. Yeah.
The other thing I've been doing during pandemic, aside from like, sessions like what you're talking about, is I actually, there's this band that I've been in for, it's like a couple of years now, including the pandemic. And we started this record at JJ Blair's place before the pandemic. Did these 2 songs, and then the pandemic hit, and we had, the plan had originally been to go back there and finish the record, but it's like that wasn't going to happen.
Right.
So we started doing it all remotely, and it started as like, well, let's see what happens. We'll do one, and then they ended up really like being happy with the results. We all ended up being really happy with the results of the first song we did like that. So that's the direction we decided to go in, is like finish this record.
Right.
And it's different with that because like because it's a record that it's a band that I'm actually a part of, I'll be in here for hours sometimes, just like
you're really nuts, really emotionally invested in it.
Totally. Yeah. And it's just kind of like, I mean, of course, the people who write the songs in the band are giving direction and, even revising things sometimes, but it's a little bit more like hands off. Like they're like, just, we trust you. This is the general direction. And that's really fun because it's like, it's almost a like just carte blanche kind of thing.
I think those things are the most important because you explore more because you're so invested, and you actually start to create your own style. Like this thing I was mentioning yesterday, the way I was listening to it come out from what I did, I was like, oh, this is kind of turning out like this kind of other thing that I did. And it's like the sounds I'm going for, and it's like where you choose to layer and things like that. And you're like, oh, I'm like, wow, that's kind of like me.
Yeah.
Like that's me, not only as a player, but as a engineer and, producer. Yeah.
Yeah.
And and I think that's when you get to go deep like that, then you start to carry those things to other people's sessions, and you can pull them out. Like we were talking about Jeff, when you've done those things, you can start to draw on them really quickly.
Yes.
Because you're like, this is my shit. I'm going here. You want this?
Yeah.
Oh, and then you get positive feedback, and you go like, oh, yep, cool.
And that's when I start to wonder, like, how it must have been in the golden age, where it's like guys were getting like I watched your interview with Kurt, and like guys were getting called because they were Jeff Porcaro or Steve Gadd or whatever, and it's like, no, we're hiring him, and that's his drums, and this is how he sounds, and we want that sound.
Right.
That's such a big distinction between, like, and then you guys were talking about, like, oh, we want it to sound like Mick Fleetwood, or we want it to sound like, I don't know, Steve Jordan or something. It's like, that's a huge difference between, like, no, we want you to be you.
Right.
Know?
Right.
Yeah.
Which is rare. Yeah. But I'm sure I have a few clients that call me to do me, and as I'm sure you do too. It's like, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's when I think that just goes back to what you were saying. Then you get to explore and really find out even more about what it is that it's almost like if you weren't thinking and you just started creating something, what would that be? And that's what you get in those situations, I think.
Right. But you have and it's nice to have a palette, a framework to put on.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The opportunity to put it somewhere.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Super cool.
Right on, dude. I think that's a great place to wrap this up. Yeah. Yeah. I appreciate it, dude.
Thanks for having me. This was great.
Of course, man. It's like this is my geekdom really coming to full circle, I think.